We're talking with Al Dutcher, who is the state climatologist for the state of Nebraska at the Sorghum Symposium here in Grand Island, where he just got done speaking. And of course, this time of the year, everybody wants to know, what are we going to look at spring?
Well, this is a very difficult pattern that we have this year with this El Nino. It's very weak. It's not doing what we typically expect with an El Nino across the entire country. Some areas are responding like we normally see with an El Nino. Other areas are not. And so the primary thing that we've been seeing is this split jet stream formation. Systems coming in the Pacific Northwest, some of the energy going north, some of the energy going south, catching in that southern stream energy, pulling in the tropical moisture from the weak El Nino event that's dying rather rapidly, pulling that through the southern plains. So when we look here in Nebraska, we basically missed out on all the precipitation events except for that one during the month of December. So when we do get one, they're a big one, but the remainder of them have really not given us much moisture. And my expectations is as we go forward in time, this El Nino event weakening, the northern jets become a much stronger. So if we take it from that standpoint and start looking at the statistical analysis in these post-El Nino periods, basically what the statistics say for the southern plains through the central plains, and that would include Nebraska, is a tendency for cooler conditions and wetter conditions through the spring period. The probabilities based on past El Nino episodes is anywhere from 60 to 70% in the southern plains for the February through April period, up to 60% in extreme southern Nebraska. But when we move into that March through May period, we start to see those statistics shifting northward into Nebraska, 60, 70% likelihood of wet, cold conditions, and unfortunately, when you start to look at the snowfall signature, that's where we see a significant uptick. So that would suggest that 6 to 7 years out of 10 events, we are going to see heavier than normal snowfall during March and April. And we know that that's the time when we don't want to see that with calving season, but in terms of soil moisture, it's very important. So that looks to be the net positive of it. The net negative is that we had wet conditions develop late August through early October. We have areas of east central Nebraska, southeast Nebraska, the eastern stretches of the Platte River Basin that basically are near full recharge down to 4 foot. So there's no place to put a substantial amount of moisture. And if you had any type of flood situation develop last fall with heavy precipitation events, you are most likely going to be prone to those problems this spring, irregardless of heavy precipitation events. You start throwing heavy precipitation events in the mix, and that area expands to cover a substantial portion of eastern Nebraska, the Platte River Valley. The only areas that we are not majorly concerned about that issue right now is the southwest, because we have that persistent dryness that hasn't undone itself. But more importantly, if we go wet and cold and we start to see that snow return to the central Rockies in a substantial portion, those are the months, March and April, where the biggest, wettest, baddest snows usually occur in the Rocky Mountains and really add to the water supply forecast. All of a sudden we start looking at the Platte River system, the northern branch. We're at 70% capacity right now within the system. We had a net gain of 300,000 acre feet in McConaughey year over year, looking at it from right now, a year ago. My concern is where we're going to put all the water, because the southern branch of the Platte is flowing at historically high levels compared to this last 20 years. And that flow is actually what's being diverted to fill up some of our reservoirs and irrigation canals in southwest Nebraska, while they're able to hold that McConaughey water back. If we go into the spring with heavy snow, with the wetness conditions in the panhandle, all those would show increased flows into McConaughey, with the increased flows in the southern branch of the Platte, and any of the substantial rain events that may occur in the central Platte Valley as we go into the spring. If this forecast verifies out, we could have a real mess on our hands, and how we're going to be able to handle that water release from McConaughey so that we don't create additional stresses downstream. So this could be an interesting dynamic that bears watching if these snows develop. If they don't develop, then everything I've said becomes a moot point, and our concern starts to evolve around, will this overall dry pattern begin to expand and cover a substantial portion of the Corn Belt? So that's where we're at. It's very difficult to make a forecast for this upcoming growing season, because really this next few months is going to make a large determination whether or not that drought risk will return to the western Corn Belt, or will that drought risk materialize in the northern Corn Belt, where El Nino statistics show essentially a strong response to below normal precipitation northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, Wisconsin, northern portions of Illinois. And if that materializes, we have to watch to see whether that area expands or just falls apart as we get into the primary growing seasons of June, July, and August. So we have two things that we're looking at that could give us totally opposite 180-degree results, and most of it will be bared out in the next 3 months. We'll make the final determination of what the projections are. For a producer, I know that doesn't give you a lot to work with, because this is when you're signing up for your crop insurance, you're making a determination of what I'm going to plant in the spring. So what I would say is watch to see whether these storm systems develop in the western corn belt, especially these big heavy snow events. We're seeing one right now in the southern plains. Do these start shifting up into the central plains as we get into the February, March, and early April period? If they do, then it looks like this wet pattern will be a dominant pattern at least through the spring period. If it doesn't, then we start watching out for rapid drought expansion from the central plains to encompass much of the western corn belt and potentially points to the east.